Hello everyone, Jay Warden here, and welcome to my recap and review of the episode Heart of Glory, our first Worf-focused episode and our first encounter with other TNG-era Klingons in what I think is a great character piece with several plot holes. Don't forget those spoilers, otherwise, enjoy. The Enterprise is responding to a disturbance in the neutral zone where some kind of battle may have just taken place, so they rush off to see what's going on. Yar reports picking up some residual weapons fire, and Data speculates they may be Romulan in origin, causing some raised eyebrows. As they arrive, they find a beaten up old freighter drifting about, and Worf reports possible life signs still on board, but due to heavy damages sustained can't be sure, so Picard tasks Riker with an away mission to see if there's anyone left to rescue. Meanwhile, Data and LaForge have been working on a new little gizmo for his visor, in the hopes that it can transmit directly to the bridge what LaForge is actually seeing, and though Data says it still has some technical issues, this seems like as good a time as any to test it out. Once on board, they try out the new gizmo, and the bridge crew are treated to an extremely colourful clash of confusing imagery as they see for the first time just how LaForge actually perceives everything around him. Picard has some fun seeing how Riker and Data look in this weird visual world he lives in before remembering that they're on a ship that might literally explode at any point, so get back to the job of looking for survivors. Though eventually the new gizmo overloads, they continue to search through various debris hazards and radiation before finally coming across 3 survivors, all of whom are Klingon, which certainly piques Worf's interest. The lead Klingon introduces himself as Chorus, but there's no time for pleasantries right now as the ship is minutes away from total collapse. One of the survivors is badly injured though, and the ship is unable to beam them back up yet because of interference from all the damage. They try to run to a better location and Yar is still having difficulties, but with some persistence and just as the ship explodes, they're all safely beamed back to the ship and the survivors taken to sickbay. After Worf asks permission from Picard to join him in sickbay, they both arrive, get an update from Dr. Beverly on the critically injured Klingon, and then introduce themselves to Chorus, who in turn introduces the other uninjured Klingon as Conmel. They explain they were attacked by a Ferengi cruiser and must have somehow drifted across into the neutral zone as a result of the battle, but Worf points out that the weapon signatures were not Ferengi. Chorus and Conmel are rather surprised at seeing this Klingon in a Starfleet uniform, and after briefly questioning Worf on this, admit that the Ferengi ship was apparently using Klingon weaponry. They further explain that the freighter captain let them take command and tricked the Ferengi into lowering their shields before using some old rockets to blow them up, impressing Worf at their tactical ingenuity. Picard though doesn't seem to quite buy this story and wants to know more, but Chorus says they're rather tired and hungry from their ordeal and want to freshen up first before answering any more questions. Worf asks if he can take them to their quarters and Picard says go for it, but after they leave, Picard lets Riker in on his suspicions and finds it odd that 3 Klingon officers just happen to be travelling on a broken down old freighter so far off course. Riker is concerned they might need a security escort, but Picard thinks Worf is the perfect man to handle this particular job. Yeah, we'll see about that. In their guest quarters, Chorus invites Worf to sit and eat with them before both he and Conmel start making fun of his Starfleet credentials, suggesting he must be weak and docile to be lying down with sheep instead of being the hunter. Worf doesn't take too kindly to this, but Chorus says he's just teasing him just to see if he still has that Klingon fire in him. Back in sickbay though, their injured comrade is beyond help, so they all come back and just as he finally dies, Worf, Chorus and Conmel give a mighty roar up at the ceiling, leaving Picard and Dr. Beverly somewhat bewildered. As they finish, Conmel sneakily detaches something from their dead comrade's boot before Chorus tells Dr. Beverly to dispose of the body as she sees fit and then leaves the room along with Worf. As they wander through the corridors, Worf wants to know what really happened on the ship, but Chorus is cagey and doesn't really seem to trust him yet before quizzing Worf on just how he came to be wearing a Starfleet uniform. Worf explains how the Romulans attacked a colony called Khitomer, where he and his parents were living at the time when he was just but a small boy. Though everyone else was killed, Worf alone survived under the rubble and was found by a Starfleet officer who took him home to raise as his own son. As they get back to their guest quarters, Worf further explains his backstory, how once he came of age he got into Starfleet Academy but regrets that he spent almost no time at all amongst his fellow Klingons. Chorus tries to use this by invoking memories of how Worf must have felt alone without any other Klingons to guide and nurture his hunter instincts, and though Worf admits he still has these feelings, says he controls them instead of ruling him. Chorus continues to try and manipulate Worf before finally admitting that they did indeed lie about what happened on the freighter. Instead, they commandeered it, left the crew behind somewhere whilst they went out in search of some glorious battle. However, it wasn't a Ferengi ship that they destroyed, but a Klingon ship that had been sent to retrieve them. Worf is shocked that they would kill their fellow brothers, but Chorus says he had no choice and that the Empire has been corrupted by its alliance with the Federation, arguing that the peace it's created has essentially started killing their warrior culture. And then just casually asks Worf if he can show them around the ship, and despite this entire admission, Worf is like, yeah, sure, no problem bro. Jesus Worf, are you really this stupid to allow these liars and obvious troublemakers to just have a good look around? They're a security threat, for fuck's sake! On the bridge, Picard is updating Riker what he observed in sickbay, and Data explains that what Picard witnessed was the Klingon death ritual, where the howling they do serves as a warning to those in the afterlife to beware that a Klingon warrior is about to arrive. Suddenly, they pick up a ship on an intercept course towards them, and it turns out to be another Klingon battlecruiser. Picard gives them a call and informs their commander about the 3 survivors. The commander briefs Picard on what we already know about Korus and his lies regarding the freighter, explaining that they're wanted criminals, and expects them to be turned over immediately to his ship once they get within transporter range. Picard gets Yar to put together a security team and detain Korus and Conmel, warning her that this could get a little dicey. As Worf continues to be an idiot by showing them around vital areas of the ship, Yar shows up with a large backup contingent and tells Worf to step aside. Korus once again keeps trying to manipulate Worf into joining them rather than letting Yar detain him, and it's clear Worf is feeling a little conflicted about the matter. But when a young girl wanders into the situation and gets picked up by Korus, it finally seems to solidify his loyalties, so Korus quickly hands the girl back and allows Yar to detain them in the brig. Meanwhile, the Klingon cruiser has finally arrived and is ready to beam the prisoners aboard, but Worf makes a direct plea to the commander, asking that they be allowed to die in battle like true Klingons. The commander sympathises and feels the same, but he has his duty and he must carry it out, so Picard tells Yar to prepare the prisoners for transport. In the brig, Korus and Conmel are up to some shenanigans and appear to be assembling a makeshift disruptor from parts they have hidden on them, as well as the object that Conmel grabbed off their dead comrade from earlier. They disable the force field and an awkward looking firefight ensues, killing both security guards, but not before they manage to kill Conmel as well. Alone, Korus manages to get to engineering, all thanks to Worf showing him about earlier, and then threatens to destroy the ship by pointing his disruptor at the warp core. He demands to speak only to Worf, so Picard and Worf head down to engineering, and after a tactical update from Yar, Picard gives Worf the green light to go and try and talk Korus down. Korus meanwhile is having delusions of grandeur and thinks if Worf joins him they can separate the ship via the battle bridge, steal the star drive section and go rampaging about the galaxy shooting anything they can. Worf though tells Korus he's stuck in the past with things just not the way they used to be and that he seeks challenges and battles in the wrong place. Korus though is having none of it and furiously insults Worf for not being a true Klingon, but in doing so allows Worf to get close enough to shoot him dead at point blank range. Having given Korus the death in battle he so wanted, Worf performs the death ritual on him and then they all return to the bridge to inform the cruiser that the situation is now dealt with. But before he leaves, the commander wants to have a quick chat with Worf. After telling him that they died well, the commander asks Worf to consider joining them once his tour of duty's up, saying they could learn much from him, as well as teaching him a thing or two. Worf is honoured at the invitation and wishes them well. The crew look on in silence at Worf as he wanders back to his station, but tells everyone he was merely being polite and that he has no intention of leaving the Enterprise. With the situation resolved, Picard sends the ship off to the next episode. So here we are, our first Worf episode, and I have quite a lot to say on this. Though it has a number of plot issues, I quite enjoyed this one because it gives our first insight into a character who, until this point, has really had nothing substantial to do, just milling about in the background, and whose most defining feature is being a Klingon. In fact, I'm not even sure what his actual duty station is supposed to be. He's not in security yet, but seems to occupy a similar role to Yar much of the time, being the security backup. Unlike Yar though, his presence is always noticed, even if it's just being in the background, and he's even had a tiny sprinkling of character moments here and there, whereas Yar gets nothing. It's fascinating really if you think about how well known and beloved Worf became as a character, not only being a main character on TNG but over on DS9 later as well, and of all the Trek actors, Michael Dorn has the highest number of appearances across all of Star Trek, with Colm Meaney as Chief O'Brien in second place. Which in itself is kind of funny when you think about how much of a background character O'Brien himself used to be, but that's a topic for another time. And yet none of this may have happened if Denise Crosby hadn't left and Yar written out of the show. It's an interesting thought experiment to wonder just how different things might have been for Worf as a character if Yar was still in the picture, not to mention how the Klingons as a culture were eventually developed, especially their politics given how central Worf often was to the politics of the Klingon Empire. You could argue that stuff like this would have still happened, but I think having both Yar and Worf as your badass warrior archetypes, you'd have to spread out your stories between the two, and as a result neither of them would get any decent focus. With all this in mind, it's fascinating really to see our first real Worf character story, and it's possibly the most important one we've had all season, laying the foundations for who Worf will turn out to be, as well as beginning to really build up the idea of who the Klingons are in this era, and I want to talk about the Klingons in general first. In the TOS era, the Klingons were essentially a stand-in for the Russians, given Cold War tensions back in the 60s being a very real threat. They were never really developed much as a species beyond being generic, evil, moustache-twirling villains, and there was certainly none of the concepts that we take for granted today that is part of their culture. And though they were given a visual upgrade in the movies, they were still not really developed much beyond this, with the exception of the undiscovered country, by which point a lot of our TNG era lore about them had already been established by then, so this was essentially backloaded into the Kirk era. I really don't mind this kind of retconning of the Klingons from TOS to TNG eras because the Klingons were only really defined as being the bad guys back then and not much more beyond this. So TNG is where we really started to take a proper look at them, developing a proper culture and character archetype for them, and is something that eventually becomes fully ingrained into the Trek franchise across all the classic Trek series. Until Star Trek Discovery, that is. I'm not going to talk too much about that here except to say that I'm not a big fan of how the Klingons are portrayed in Discovery, certainly not in Season 1 anyway. I just felt that they were not very consistent with the lore and culture that had now been firmly established from all the previous series. Season 2 of Discovery did improve on this somewhat, albeit largely aesthetically, giving them their trademark hairstyles back, and the reintroduction of the D7 battlecruiser is a gorgeous remake of a classic design. Perhaps though I'm just being a bitter old man here, nostalgically pining for the good old days, but they just don't feel like the Klingons I had come to know and love, and it matters to me that they feel largely consistent from what came before. Anyway, we get the first real foundations of the Klingon mindset here, notably duty, honour and loyalty, as well as establishing how some aspects of Klingon culture see the alliance with the Federation as a weakness rather than a strength, as well as giving us the infamous Klingon death howl. Korris and Conmel represent perhaps the old guard of the Klingons from the TOS era, bent on conquest and battle, while Worf, tempered by his human upbringing, represents the ideal Klingon, at least certainly what the ideal Klingon should be in his head, and this is something that will come up over and over again in both TNG and DS9 as Worf's ideas about what Klingons should be come up against what many Klingons actually are. We're still a long way yet from seeing all the cool political intrigue and exploring the contradictory nature of the Klingons, who extol virtues of duty, honour and loyalty yet routinely break these virtues in their actions, but we'll look more into this when we come to it. For now, let's just get back to looking at this episode. As I mentioned, it does have a number of plot holes, the most egregious of which is Worf blithely showing Korris and Conmel around the ship after they admit their essentially criminal actions to him. They openly admit that they lied to Picard and that they even destroyed another Klingon ship, yet Worf thinks it's perfectly okay to just show them around vital areas of the ship. Worf is often humorously mocked by fans of Star Trek for being regularly bad at his job as head of security, as well as getting his ass kicked all the time, and I feel this is where that little trope first begins, even though he's not head of security just yet. But this feels rather out of character that even Worf would do something this stupid, so I put this down to poor writing. The other big problem is the episode tries to make out that Worf's loyalties are really divided here, and that he's genuinely agonising over whether to help Korris or not, and yet I never really felt there was any stakes here for Worf to actually be agonising over beyond his kinship with seeing some fellow Klingons. Certainly nothing to be agonising his loyalties over anyway. Korris and Conmel are obviously painted as bad guys very early on. Picard certainly recognises that they're up to no good almost straight away, yet seemingly trusts Worf to take care of them. For that matter, I have no idea what Korris ever thought he could accomplish here by stealing the ship. Does he really think that just between him, Conmel and Worf they could just steal the star drive section of the ship? This is a crew of over 1,000 people on board, and as badass warriors as they might think they are, even assuming they did separate the ship, they'd still be dealing with presumably hundreds of personnel still left on the star drive section, and without being in control of engineering could have easily been stopped. Having said that, Season 1 has shown us several times now the crew being utterly incompetent at their job, so maybe I'm wrong and they really could have just gotten away with it. But I also think their initial plan before encountering the Enterprise seemed quite dumb. They commandeer a battered old freighter with minimal defences so they could, go rampaging about looking for glory? Though I understand what motivates Korris and what he wants out of life, I guess I just feel that how he was trying to accomplish this was pretty dumb. But hey, at least this time Yar actually did her job and brought along a large security contingent with her when she's ordered to detain them. Where was this kind of security detail in Data lore, or the rescue mission in too short a season? Putting these issues aside though, it's still a pretty good episode to watch just because of the focus on Worf. And with the spotlight firmly on him, Michael Dorn finally gets to shine here, especially in his final moments with Chorus as he explains where the challenges in life for a Klingon really lie. And it wonderfully helps to flesh out this otherwise previously one-dimensional background character by showing us the strength of his convictions and what he believes. It's also welcome to get the general backstory on how Worf came to be in Starfleet in the first place, and is again something that will be brought up repeatedly again in the future, just as Data lore was a vital episode in establishing the background of how Data came to exist. This episode also marks the first appearance of Vaughn Armstrong into the Trek franchise, and he'll go on to guest star in many more episodes across the franchise as various alien characters, but perhaps being best known as a regular guest star in Enterprise playing Admiral Forrest. Armstrong here does a great job in bringing Chorus to life as a believably angry yet disillusioned Klingon, unhappy with the course his people have taken in their alliance with the Federation. I was however far less impressed with Charles Hyman's portrayal of Conmel and found him rather boring as Klingon characters go. There's one other little aspect of this episode that you could almost forget about amongst all the Klingon stuff here, and that is that we get a bit of insight into Geordi and how he actually sees the world around him with his visor. Although I found the implementation of this here a bit out of place, I did nonetheless enjoy seeing this little character moment for him, and it's cool seeing Picard's sense of wonder as he looks at the visual cacophony that Geordi lives with all the time, and I think visually this is portrayed quite well. It looks like gibberish to us of course, and Picard even makes a point of this, but Geordi nicely explains how he filters out the information naturally, just like we would if we were in a crowded noisy room and are trying to pick out a single voice or sound. As I said though, I think the use of this gizmo, though a nice idea, was a bit out of place here, and given the urgent and deteriorating situation on the freighter, too long was spent on being awed at the visual frenzy of what Geordi sees, and we also never see this device appear ever again, so really it just ends up as a forgotten and wasted opportunity. Finally, and this is really just a nitpick on my part, the episode mentions the neutral zone again, but the crew seems surprised Romulans might be about and even quite happily enter the zone without any concerns, given how big an issue it becomes later on as the Romulans become the primary antagonist of the series. I know, it's a little nitpick and they haven't properly established the lore yet, but it's just something I noticed. So there we have it. Despite several plot issues, this is really I think a great character piece. Possibly the best character-based episode of the season so far, and absolutely vital to watch in establishing the future lore of both Worf and the Klingons. This is also my longest review to date, so I hope you managed to stick with me through my ramblings, but it's been a genuine pleasure to be able to talk about all this stuff. Next time, the crew find a dead world with deadly weapons on them, and Geordi gets to be the captain again in the episode, The Arsenal of Freedom. Please feel free to leave any comments or feedback, and if you liked this episode then please do like, subscribe and share. This has been Jay Warden, signing off.